Okay, this is video 4B on expounding and expanding on the 50 problems with the Mormon Church video that Jeremy put out. And the topics we're on here have to do with the multiple versions of Joseph Smith's first vision and historical anachronisms and contradictions in the history relative to this occasion and time period. The other thing with regards to this is that doesn't sound like a revival time if it was shortly after that, because the camp meetings went on in the summer. Let's remember they were in upstate New York. There's something that happens called cold weather and deep snow that happen, and you're in the winter in upstate New York, and these ministers from the various denominations were traveling on routes or circuits, you might say, to do these camp meetings, and it appears that representatives, preachers from various religions, especially the three named, Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians, were present at some of these meetings, working in tandem and then dividing converts up later. If you read about the converts, the camp meetings, they were pretty wild, or have a reputation for being extremely wild venues. Wikipedia's got good original source material on camp meetings if you care to take a look at that. And I mean, they went on for days. People camped out there. They didn't have cars. There was just wild stuff happening. People, going in trances, dancing for long periods of time, laughing, twitching, really wild things occurring. Brothels were operating on the outskirts, and there were pretty wild things happening. Common talk was, and a joke was that there were a lot of babies born 9 months after the camp meetings. Pretty wild things happening. Anyway, and things going on late into the night. Well, this would have been in the summer or the harvest time. They talk about in August and that sort of thing. Well, Joseph Smith says that this started sometime during his 15th year. So he's born December 23rd. Well, it doesn't get warm until June, July, August, that sort of thing. These things were happening in the summer. So if that happened in the summer of his 15th year, and then he's pondering it and all these things, he doesn't have the vision until early spring. Well, these camp meetings, and all this didn't happen at the beginning of the spring. They started in the summer, so that means he would have been the next year. He would have been 15. So he's blown it out once again, created another anachronism there. It would have had to have been the following year in 1821 when it happened, or he would have had to have been in his 14th year, being a 13-year-old when the camp meetings started, that got him going on this. So there are numerous problems, even, and I haven't seen that one discussed, but if you carefully read what he writes, he seems to have a habit of writing things that have anachronistic qualities. For instance, the translation of the Book of Mormon, the translation of Genesis and the Bible, or the additions to it in the Book of Moses, and then the Doctrine and Covenants, section 107. Moses and D&C 107 both talk about Enoch and various other patriarchs, everybody that lived at the time of Enoch, face-to-face visits with the Lord. The Lord lives with them for 365 years. The Lord appears to them at Adam-on-Diamond with all of these people, plus 8 patriarchs named. And then, between about almost 900 years after the Adam-on-Diamond, and between, say, 7 and 1100 years after the whole span of these things going on with Enoch, and they're vividly described, the brother of Jared meets with the Lord in Ether chapter 3, and verses 9 and verses 15 of that chapter, the Lord says, no one's ever seen me. Verse 9, he said, no, you're the first one to ever have enough faith. If you didn't have this much faith, you couldn't have seen me. And verse 15, he said, no one's ever seen me before. Ever. You're the first. You are the first that's ever seen me. No one's ever had enough faith. Okay, so what? 1,000 years before, Enoch, in Joseph Smith translated and inspired documents, is face to face with the Lord, has such faith that he moves mountains and rivers and builds the city of Zion. Then it's lifted up, and he's in the bosom of the Father. So, once again, he seems to be falling all over himself in his accounts of things, in contradicting each other badly, and huge anachronistic issues. Another one in the Moses account, chapter 6. This is maybe less blatant. Chapter 6 goes over the chronology of the patriarchs, saying when they were born and when they died, and if you add it up, so Adam's 130 when he has Seth, and Seth is 105 when he has Enosh, or Enos, depending on if you're looking at Hebrew or whatever. The next on and on, 95, 70, 75, 65, 162. So bottom line is, when the city of Zion, which has all the righteous people in it, because it states in there that the unrighteous people were left on earth, the less righteous, and then which were a mixture of all the seed of Cain, all the seed of Adam except for the seed of Cain, and they were excluded. They lived separately because they were black. And so all the righteous folks, which would have been these patriarchs, you got to figure they were righteous enough to see the Lord. They should have been in the city of Enoch, or the city of Zion, which was translated when Enoch was 430 years old, meaning his great-great-grandpa was still alive, but it says he died 88 years later. And then his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his dad. So between 300 and some years and 88 years, after the city was translated, it records that they died. How would they die if they're translated? Why wouldn't they be with him? It says the one who didn't go was Methuselah. All these other guys were alive at the time, but it said Methuselah stayed on earth and didn't go with the city, so that he could watch over his 100-year-old child Lamech, who was the father of Noah. Doesn't even mention Lamech at that point. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Also, in that same vision, where he's the vision of Enoch, the Lord says, "Look for a time, I'll show you generations to come." And he sees the people who are called the people of Canaan, and the people of Canaan get together and they murder the people of Shem, and then they turn black. It says there was a blackness that went upon them, and actually right before that it says that it describes the land, that the Lord cursed the land with barrenness and heat, and no other people lived there besides the Canaanites after that. Well, since the belief is there that the Canaanites were black, it states it, and only black people lived in that land, and they had a large area that was expanding and full of heat and barrenness. It pretty much sounds like Africa. Well, supposedly the continents weren't divided at the time of Enoch, so it sounds like it's a time in the future, like after the flood. Nevertheless, it says that Enoch was instructed to go preach to all these other people, but then it specifically says, but he did not go, he didn't bother with the Canaanites. So obviously they were present at his time, yet they're called Canaanites, so we don't know who Canaan was as far as that Canaan, because it's not spelled like the good Canaan of the patriarch. It is spelled like Canaan, the son of Ham, who was hundreds and hundreds of years later, and who was a Canaanite himself by birth because his, because he was a son of Ham and Egyptus, and they produced Canaanites, apparently because Egyptus, meaning Egypt, was from the forbidden race, and thus the blood of the Canaanites was preserved in the land. Couldn't be preserved unless it was already there, so obviously they're talking about someone who came before. Plus it links in Abraham chapter 1 to Moses chapter 7, Canaanites, who were turned black. Of course, we're told that they're the seed of Cain, but it also in there says that the seed of Cain were black. So if the seed of Cain were already black, how did these guys turn black? They must have been not black before. So whose seed were they? It gets really convoluted. So I guess I guess we beat that one up enough. And looking for specific details, look at Jeremy's CES letter and look at the links off of his video here for detailed stuff. And Mormon Think's got a good chart on it, and I'm sure there are others, but I mention them because they try to be fair and balanced. You got folks like the Tanners who basically seem to be pretty honest, because I've actually looked at some of their stuff. They are probably I don't know if they try to present views on both sides or not. I'm not going to represent what they do or what they don't. They're born again Christians. They grew up in the church and noticed issues that, like all these, bring into question how could Jesus Christ be guiding the church if such and such is the case, if the prophet can't seem to keep his story straight, if Jesus says one thing in the book of Ether and then appears, in the book of Moses 1,000 years earlier, when he says he's never showed himself to somebody. So these are all issues, and they are issues with consistency with the theme that Jesus Christ could be guiding the church. A few more things relative to this whole first vision and or the Joseph Smith history that's now shown in the Pearl of Great Price, changes, anachronisms, weird stuff. Well, what else goes on there? He denies the treasure digging thing, or he says that he says that he was basically employed for Josiah Smith, and that's how him being a money digger becomes some kind of a prevalent story, when there's surfaced lots and lots of history regarding that, and I'll do that in another video. But basically, he's denying something that's a common practice of him. I mean, that's how he met his wife. He was staying at the Hales home as a leader of an exploration party. He was the seer, using his seer stone that he used in his hat. So, it's the farmer's daughter story, and he elopes with Emma because the dad wasn't much excited about her being involved with Joseph Smith, considering his reputation as a necromancer. Speaking of which, yes, he did get involved with the Methodist Church even after the time that the first vision was supposed to have happened, and he was involved with the Methodist Sunday school group, and his own relatives got him kicked out for being a practicing necromancer because they did necromancy, sacrificing animals, black animals like goats and dogs, to the demons guarding these treasures that they were digging up in the middle of the night. Anyway, Dan Vogel and D. Michael Quinn both do really great jobs of their historical research. D. Michael Quinn wrote Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. He was a BYU professor. Church didn't like what he published, so he wound up getting fired and excommunicated. Dan Vogel does some great videos, a lot of good historical research as well. So let's go to